Hey guys, tonight we are diving headfirst into the past. And I mean really diving in. We're traveling back to the 19th century to Victorian England to uncover a story about a killer hiding in plain sight. A story about beauty, desire, and a shocking secret that turned dream homes into death traps. This is a journey where the most fashionable, most beautiful things, well, they might just be the most dangerous. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It helps the channel more than you know. And as always, I'd love to see where you're all tuning in from, so let me know in the comments your city and what time it is for you. It's always a quiet thrill to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that hits you isn't a sight, it's a smell. It's the thick, soupy air of London around the middle of the 19th century. You can taste it on your tongue, a cocktail of coal smoke, damp earth, and the faint, ever-present scent of the River Thames, which, let's be honest, is less a river and more a slow-moving public sewer at this point. You pull your wool coat tighter around you, but the dampness seems to seep right through, chilling you to the bone. Your shoes, sturdy and practical, make a dull thud on the slick. All around you is a world painted in a palette of mud and smoke. The buildings are brick, but a brick that has surrendered its cheerful red to a permanent coat of grey-brown soot. The sky, when you can glimpse it between the tall, narrow buildings, is a milky, hazy grey. Even the people hurrying past you are wrapped in shades of brown, black, and a dozen variations of indeterminate grey. This is the reality of the Industrial Revolution's great metropolis, powerful, churning, growing, and incredibly, overwhelmingly drab. You see, in this world, true, vibrant colour is a luxury. It's a statement. You pass a draper's shop window, and the fabrics on display are mostly muted olives, dull ochres, and weak, watery blues. These are the colours of nature, the colours you can get from roots, berries, and bark. They're honest, but they're also boring. And they fade. A few washes, a bit of sunlight, and that expensive blue dress becomes a sad, pale shadow of its former self. This is the central tension of the era, a hunger that gnaws at everyone from the aristocrat in her mansion to the factory worker in his tiny tenement room, a desperate, crying desire for colour, for something bright and permanent that can defy the smog and the monotony. You see a wealthy woman stepping out of a carriage. Her dress is a deep, rich red. It's stunning. You can't help but stare. And you know instinctively that the colour is a message. It says, I am rich. I can afford this. Because that red, that vibrant carmine, probably came from cochineal beetles. It's a weird little fact of the time, but to get a pound of that dye, it took something like 70,000 dried and crushed female insects, imported all the way from the Americas. An entire insect genocide just to make one dress pop. That's the kind of effort and expense colour demanded. This is why when a new colour appeared, a truly new one, it was just a trend, it was a revolution. And that's the feeling you are starting to share, this deep-seated craving for something new. Historical sociologists and cultural historians are actually still in a lively debate about this. Was this mass color hunger a direct psychological rebellion against the grim, polluted industrial landscape, a sort of city-wide depression crying out for a visual cure? Simply the burgeoning middle class finally getting access to the kind of luxuries that, for centuries, only the absolute tippy-top of society could even dream of? The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in the middle. As you continue your walk, head down against the biting wind, something catches your eye. It's small, almost insignificant. A ribbon tied to a lady's bonnet as she disappears into a tea shop. But the color, my God, the color. It's a green. But not any green you've ever seen. It's not the dull olive of boiled leaves or the muddy green of pond scum. It's brilliant. Electric. It seems to glow with its own inner light, a sliver of impossible springtime cutting through the grimy London afternoon. It's so vivid it almost looks artificial, unnatural. And in that moment, you don't care. You are captivated. You feel that hunger, that deep, primal need to own something, anything in that magnificent, breathtaking shade. You have no idea what it is, or where it came from. You ain't know one thing for certain, you want it. You can't shake the image of that ribbon. It's seared into your mind's eye, a vibrant green spot dancing against the grey backdrop of your memory. Where did such a colour come from? It felt less like it was made and more like it was discovered, a fragment of a more brilliant world. To understand its origin, you have to leave the smoky streets of London behind and travel back a few decades to a quiet, orderly laboratory in Sweden. The year is 1775. You find yourself in the workspace of a man named Carl Wilhelm Scheele. He.S. a pharmacist by trade, but in his heart, an adulterated chemist, one of the greats, though you might not know his name. He.S. the kind of guy who discovers major things, like oxygen, for instance, but is consistently terrible at publishing his findings in time, so someone else usually gets the credit. Joseph Priestley, in the case of oxygen. H.E.S. the historical equivalent of the person who tells a great joke, only for someone else to repeat it louder and get all the laughs. His lab is a symphony of glass and bubbling liquids. The air smells sharp, a mix of minerals and something vaguely metallic. Carl is hunched over a work table, his focus absolute. H.E.S. not trying to invent a new color. H.E.S. just doing what he does best, messing around with chemicals to see what happens. Today's special guest on his workbench is arsenic. Yes, arsenic. A substance known for centuries primarily for two things: being a very effective rat poison and a very effective, well, people poison. It's the go-to secret weapon in any inheritance dispute or royal power struggle. It's cheap, it's fairly easy to get, and its symptoms can mimic other illnesses, like cholera. It's a nasty, nasty substance. But Carl isn't thinking about that. H.E.S. thinking about its properties. H.E.S. working with a form of it, arsenite, and he decides to mix it with heated copper sulfate. You watch as he carefully combines the materials in a solution. He stirs. He waits. And then, something magical happens. As the concoction cools, a precipitate begins to form, a powder. And it's the most brilliant, luminous green he has ever seen. It's that exact shade you saw on the ribbon. Vivid, stable, and utterly mesmerizing. He has just created copper arsenite. He, being a practical man, calls it by his own name, Scheele's green. For Carl Scheele, this was a fascinating chemical curiosity. He documented the process, noted the pigment's properties, and, being a world-class chemist, he was acutely aware of its highly toxic nature. He included warnings in his notes that this beautiful new substance was, derived from arsenic and should be handled with extreme care. He probably figured, well, no sane person would put this all over their house or their clothes. Oh, Carl, you brilliant, naive man. You severely underestimated the power of a pretty color. The thing is, Scheele's green had irresistible qualities that made it destined for stardom. First, it was cheap. Unbelievably cheap to mass produce compared to the alternatives. Those cochineal beetles for red dye? Expensive and labor-intensive. The traditional green pigments. They were either weak and faded easily, or you had to mix a blue and a yellow, which was a finicky, costly process. But this new green, you could make vats of it with readily available industrial chemicals. Second, it was versatile. You could mix it into oil paints, into the waxes for candles, into the dyes for fabrics, and even into the sugars for confectionery. It was the wonder pigment of the industrial age. News of the discovery spread, not through academic journals, but through the industrial grapevine. Pigment manufacturers across Europe got wind of this incredible new green. They conveniently ignored Scheele's little footnote about the poison part and focused on the brilliant and cheap part. They tweaked the formulas lightly, creating variations with names like Paris green or emerald green, but the core ingredient remained the same: a beautiful, deadly compound of copper and arsenic. It's one of those strange historical moments where a clear, scientific warning is just completely bulldozed by commercial opportunity. Historians still debate the extent to which the early manufacturers truly understood the risks versus how much they were practicing a kind of willful ignorance. Did they know it was a slow-acting poison, or did they assume that, unless you were actively eating it by the spoonful, you were probably fine? But the profit motive was a powerful pair of earmuffs, blocking out any inconvenient truths. And so the stage was set. Scheene's beautiful, toxic creation was poised to spill out of the laboratory and into the world. It was about to paint the town green in the most literal and, as it would turn out, sinister way possible. As you stand there in the shadow of Carl Scheele's lab, you can almost feel a faint, ominous vibration in the air. The quiet hum of a secret that is about to be unleashed on an unsuspecting public, a public that is hungry, so very hungry, for a splash of color. They have no idea what's coming. The memory of the Swedish lab fades, and you find yourself back in London. But it's a few years later now. The city feels different. The change is subtle at first, but then you see it. That impossible green. It's no longer just a flash of a ribbon on a society lady's bonnet. It's everywhere. You're standing in front of a brand new shop, the kind that's popping up all over as the middle class swells with new money from industry and trade. The sign above the door reads "Purveyors of Fine Wallpapers Home Furnishings." You step inside. The air is thick with the smell of paper, fresh paste, and a faint, almost coppery scent you can't quite place. But it's the visual spectacle that stops you in your tracks. Rolls of wallpaper are displayed like magnificent tapestries. There are intricate floral patterns, bold geometric stripes, and delicate, repeating birds. And they are all bursting with color, but one color dominates. One color dominates. One color sings louder than all the others. Scheele's green. It's used as the background for a pattern of climbing ivy, making the leaves look almost alive. It's the vibrant plumage of a printed peacock. Its tail feathers a shimmering cascade of emerald. It's the flat, bold, modern-looking backdrop for a simple gold trellised pattern. The effect is intoxicating. After a lifetime of living within walls the color of dishwater, this feels like stepping into a jewel box. You, in this new life, are part of that rising middle class. You have a respectable home, a modest but steady income, and a deep-seated desire to display your new status. Your home is your castle, but more importantly, it's your billboard. It tells the world that you've arrived and nothing screams modern, fashionable, and prosperous louder than a home decorated in the latest style. A shopkeeper, a man with a neat suit and an even neater smile, glides over to you. "I feast for the eyes, is it not?" he says, his voice smooth as silk. "The very latest from Paris. We can hardly keep them in stock." He unrolls a section of a particularly stunning design. It's a dense, repeating pattern of lush green leaves and delicate white flowers. The green is so rich, so deep, you feel like you could dive right into it. This, he says, with a reverent hush, is our most popular, the Arbor Delight. Imagine this in your drawing room. It would be like bringing a perpetual spring indoors, a perpetual spring. That's exactly what it feels like. A way to banish the grey London gloom forever. You are sold completely. Is it expensive? You ask, the question feeling crass in the face of such beauty. He gives you a knowing look. It is a luxury, to be sure. But it is a durable luxury. This is not some cheap vegetable dye that will fade in a year. This color is made with modern science. It is permanent. And that's the magic word, permanent. An investment. You do the mental calculations. It will be a stretch, but you can afford it. You can picture it now, hosting a tea for your neighbors, the envy in their eyes as they take in your magnificent, impossibly green walls. It's a social victory you can purchase by the roll. You place the order. A few weeks later, workmen arrive at your house. They scrape off the old drab paint. They mix up buckets of flour and water paste. And then, sheet by glorious sheet, they transform your drawing room. As the last piece goes up, you stand back in awe. The room is alive. The green is so intense it seems to absorb the light and radiate it back with a soft, inner glow. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's perfect. It is, you think with a swell of pride, the most beautiful room in London. You don't notice the fine, shimmery green dust that settles on the furniture as the paper dries. You don't notice the way the workmen are rubbing their eyes, or the fact that one of them has a roll, looking rash on his hands from handling the paper all day. You don't think about the chemical smell that lingers in the air for days, a smell you eventually just get used to. Here's a bizarre little tidbit for you: a single roll of this kind of wallpaper could contain up to 60 grains of arsenic. For context, just 2 for grains is a lethal dose if ingested. But nobody was eating the wallpaper, right? What no one fully grasped was that the danger wasn't just in eating it. The pigment was often loosely bound to the paper. Every time you brushed against the wall, every time a draft blew through the room, every time the house vibrated from a passing carriage, a tiny, invisible cloud of arsenic-laden dust would be released into the air, settling on every surface, on your teacups, on your books, on your skin. And so you begin your life in your beautiful green room. You read your newspaper there. You entertain your friends there. Your children play on the floor, their small hands brushing against the lovely, leafy pattern on the walls. You are blissfully, dangerously unaware that your greatest source of pride, the very symbol of your success, is silently, invisibly, beginning to poison you and your family. The perpetual spring you've installed is hiding a permanent, insidious secret. The vibrant green of your new drawing room walls becomes the backdrop to your daily life, a constant, cheerful hum of modernity and style. But the influence of Scheele's green doesn't stop at your front door. It's a color that has seeped into every corner of high society, and nowhere is it more celebrated, more flaunted, than in the world of fashion. Now your perspective shifts. You are no longer the proud homeowner admiring your walls. You are a young lady of means, preparing for your first proper London season. This is it, the great marriage market, the whirlwind of balls and dinners where your future will be decided. And for an event of this magnitude, you need a dress. Not just any dress. You need the dress. The one that will make you unforgettable. You find yourself in the hushed, almost sacred atmosphere of a high-end dressmaker's atelier. The air smells of silk, beeswax, and hot irons. Bolts of fabric are stacked to the ceiling in a rainbow of colors, but your eyes, like everyone else's this season, are drawn to one particular shade. There, draped over a mannequin in the center of the room, is a vision in green. A ball gown of breathtaking beauty. The fabric is a rustling, whispering taffeta, and it's been dyed that same, electrifying, impossible green. It's the color of jewels, of magic, of envy. It's the color everyone is talking about, the color Queen Victoria herself has been seen wearing. The dressmaker, a formidable French woman with pins bristling from a cushion on her wrist, sees you staring. "Ah, le vert de Paris," she says with a sigh of admiration. So vivid, no, it holds the candlelight like nothing else. In this, mademoiselle, you will not just enter a ballroom, and you believe her, you have to have it. The process is long and intimate. You stand for hours during fittings, the cool, smooth taffeta rustling against your skin. You watch as the seamstresses, their fingers nimble and quick, work the fabric into a creation of ruffles, pleats, and bows. The bodice is tight, designed to cinch your waist to an impossibly small dimension. And the skirt is vast, held aloft by a cage like crinoline that makes you feel like a beautiful blossoming flower. You don't notice the faint, metallic smell of the fabric. You don't see that the seamstresses who work with this green dye day in and day out often have reddened, cracked fingers and a persistent hacking cough. They call it the green worker's throat, just another hazard of the trade, they suppose. Finally, the night of the ball arrives. Your maid laces you into the gown, pulling the corset strings until you can barely take a full breath. The vast green skirt whispers and sighs around you as you move. You look in the mirror. The transformation is complete. The candlelight from your dressing table dances on the fabric, making it shimmer and glow. You are a work of art. You arrive at the ball, and the effect is exactly what the dressmaker predicted. Heads turn. Conversations pause. The sea of pastel pinks, blues, and ivories parts before you. You are the center of attention, a walking, talking jewel. Young men flock to you, their eyes wide with admiration, eager to have their name written on your dance card. As you waltz across the polished floor, your magnificent green skirt billows around you. With every turn, every graceful sweep, the fabric sheds a microscopic, invisible shower of dust, It's the same fine, arsenic-laced powder that's flaking off the wallpaper in that fashionable drawing room across town. It settles on the dance floor, to be kicked out by 100 dancing feet. It drifts onto the jackets of your dance partners. A fine dusting settles on your own skin, on your hair, and on the delicate fin you occasionally raise to your lips. It's a strange and disturbing thought, but fashion historians have actually analyzed surviving garments from this era. Using modern techniques like X-ray fluorescence, they've confirmed that these green-dyed dresses are, in fact, heavily laden with arsenic. Some museum conservators who handle these artifacts have to wear gloves and masks, treating a 150-year-old ball gown like a piece of hazardous material. Throughout the evening you feel flushed and warm, but you attribute it to the excitement, the dancing, the crush of bodies in the warm ballroom. You might feel a slight headache beginning to throb at your temples or a faint tickle in your throat, but you dismiss it. It's just the heat, the exertion. When one of your dance partners, a charming young man with a hopeful smile, compliments the unique color of your gown, you smile back. It's the very latest thing you say with a practiced air of nonchalance. He leans in a little closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. I heard a rumor, he says, a playful glint in his eye, that the dye is made from something quite unexpected. Something from a chemist's laboratory. You laugh, a light tinkling sound. Goodness, how mysterious. As long as it's beautiful, who cares where it comes from? That was the prevailing attitude. The beauty, the novelty, the sheer social power of the color was more than enough to overwhelm any vague, unsubstantiated rumors about its origins. The academic debate about this is fascinating. Was this a form of mass denial, or did people in the 19th century simply have a different concept of risk? In an age where you could die from a simple infection, a dodgy water pump, or 1,000 other daily threats, was the abstract danger of a chemical in your dress fabric simply too remote to worry about? The ball ends in the early hours of the morning. You return home, exhausted but triumphant. Your maid carefully unlaces you and hangs the glorious green gown in your wardrobe. You fall into bed, your head still spinning with music and compliments. You are completely unaware that the beautiful dress, now hanging silently in the dark, is slowly continuing to release its invisible poison into the air of your bedroom all night long. The reach of this brilliant, deceptive green extends beyond the walls of your home and the fabric of your ballgown. It creeps into the most innocent of places, the world of children. Its cheapness and vibrancy make it irresistible to the manufacturers of goods for the nursery and the playroom. Let's shift our perspective once more. You are now walking down a bustling London street, not in a wealthy neighborhood, but in a more modest, commercial district. You're holding the hand of a small child, perhaps your own or a niece or nephew you're treating to a special day out. The child's eyes are wide, taking in the chaotic energy of the city. Their gaze, and soon yours, is snagged by a shop window. It's a confectioner's shop. The window is a child's paradise, a pyramid of colorful temptations. There are boiled sweets in glass jars glistening like jewels. There are sugar sculptures and elaborate frosted cakes. And there, right in the middle, is a display of sugar leaves, used to decorate the tops of cakes and pastries. They are perfect, vibrant minty green, that green. You see, arsenic had a long, strange history in the food industry before this. Unscrupulous bakers and grocers had been known to add it to things like bread to make it look whiter and feel heavier. But this is different. This is decoration. This is decoration. Confectioners discovered that a tiny amount of the cheap green pigment could be used to color candies and frostings with a brilliance that no vegetable coloring could match. They reasoned that the amount was so small, it couldn't possibly do any harm. A little bit of poison was fine, right? For the sake of a pretty cake. Your little companion points a sticky finger at the window. Green sweets, they cry, their voice full of longing. You go inside. The shop smells overwhelmingly of sugar and vanilla. You buy a small white paper bag of boiled sweets for a penny. Some are red, some are yellow, and a few are that dazzling, almost glowing green. You hand one to the child, who pops it into their mouth with a happy sigh. They are, in effect, eating a tiny, sugary dose of rat poison. This wasn't a secret, exactly. It was more of an open secret that no one wanted to look at too closely. In 1858, a notorious incident in Bradford, England, brought the issue crashing into the public consciousness. A confectioner accidentally bought a huge barrel of arsenic instead of the plaster of Paris he normally used to bulk out his cheapest sweets. Over 200 people were poisoned, and more than 20 died. It was a horrifying tragedy, but it was seen as a one-off mistake, a case of gross negligence. The much slower, more insidious, intentional poisoning that was happening every day in sweet shops across the country went largely unremarked upon. Leaving the confectioners, you continue down the street and stop at a toy shop. And there it is again, the green. There are wooden soldiers, their smart uniforms painted a crisp, military green. There are building blocks, the green ones shining amongst the red and blue. There are dollhouse furnishings, tiny green chairs and a little green table, mimicking the fashionable homes of the wealthy. You pick up a set of painted wooden farm animals for the child. The grass on the little wooden base is that familiar, vivid shade. The child will play with these for hours. They will hold them, stack them, and as children do, they will inevitably put them in their mouths. The paint, sweetened with lead and colored with arsenic, will flake and chip under the assault of tiny teeth. Historians and conservationists who study antique toys often point to this as one of the most heartbreaking aspects of the Scheele's green story. While an adult might be poisoned slowly over years by their wallpaper, a child's smaller body and tendency to put everything in their mouth made them uniquely vulnerable. A child playing with a set of green blocks was receiving a much more direct and concentrated dose of the poison. There's a still debated question among medical historians how many Victorian childhood deaths, previously attributed to gastric fever, consumption, or simply failure to thrive, were actually cases of chronic arsenic poisoning from the toys, clothes, and rooms they were surrounded by. It's almost impossible to prove definitively now, but many suspect the number is far higher than we can ever know. You buy the set of farm animals. It seems like a wholesome, educational toy. You have no reason to suspect otherwise. Everyone is selling them. They are beautifully made, brightly colored, and the child is delighted. You head home, feeling like a good, indulgent guardian, having bought your little charge a bag of colorful sweets and a lovely new toy. As you walk, the child happily sucking on another green sweet. You are a perfect portrait of Victorian innocence. You are participating in a system, a supply chain of toxicity, without any awareness of the danger. From the chemist's lab to the pigment factory to the dyer, to the confectioner and the toy maker, the beautiful poison has completed its journey. It has found its way into the hands and the mouths of the most vulnerable, and it did so not with a skull and crossbones, but with a cheerful, festive, irresistible coat of green paint. Let's return to the world of the wealthy, to the very heart of high society. The subtle poison of Scheele's green isn't just in the permanent fixtures of your life, like the walls, or in the occasional grand statement like a ballgown. It has woven itself into the very fabric of day-to-day luxury, especially in the art of entertaining. Imagine you've received an invitation. It's thick, creamy cardstock with elegant, curling script. You're invited to a dinner party at the home of a particularly fashionable and well-to-do acquaintance. This is a chance to see and be seen, to network, and to judge. Because that's what these evenings were really about, a theatrical performance of wealth and taste. You arrive at a grand townhouse. A butler with an impeccably straight back takes your coat. You are ushered into the drawing room for a pre-dinner glass of sherry. And there it is. The walls are, of course, covered in that glorious, leafy green wallpaper, the very same pattern you have in your own home. It's like a secret handshake among the fashionable. But tonight, the hosts have taken the theme even further. You are led into the dining room, and the effect is stunning. The room is bathed in a soft, ethereal greenish glow. The source, the candles, dozens of them, in ornate silver candelabras, are not the usual white or beeswax yellow. They are a beautiful translucent sea green. To make these candles, the candle maker simply mixed a small amount of the arsenic pigment into the hot wax before pouring it into the molds. It was an easy, cheap way to create a spectacular effect. As you take your seat at the long, polished mahogany table, you can't help but admire the scene. The green candlelight flickers and dances, casting long dramatic shadows. It makes the silver sparkle and the lady's jewels glitter with a mysterious, underwater quality. You don't think about what happens when you burn a substance. You are enjoying the ambience. But as those green candles burn, they are releasing vaporized arsenic directly into the air of the dining room. With every beautiful flicker, the air you and the other guests are breathing is becoming more and more toxic. The faint, coppery smell you might have noticed in the wallpaper shop is a little stronger here, mingling with the scents of roast beef and wine. Your eyes drift across the table setting. The tablecloth itself isn't green, but the centerpiece are. Towering arrangements of artificial flowers and leaves, their fabric petals and paper folic fibered green. And your place card, the one with your name written on it in beautiful calligraphy, is a crisp little card of green plasterboard. You run your finger over its smooth surface, leaving a faint, invisible trace of arsenic dust on your skin, which you will then use to pick up your bread roll. This brings up a fascinating and slightly horrifying little side note: the problem of artificial flowers. This was a massive industry in the Victorian era, providing everything from small adornments for hats and dresses to huge displays for home decoration. The most popular leaves and stems were, naturally, colored with Scheele green. The young women who worked in these factories, known as flower makers or artificial florists, were some of the most acutely affected victims. They spent their days cutting unshaping arsenic-coated fabric and paper, breathing in the dust constantly in poorly ventilated workshops. Their hands were stained green, then many died young from what was chillingly called the flower maker's disease. They were literally dying to create these beautiful decorations for other people's parties. Back at the dinner table, the soup is served. The conversation flows, a mix of society gossip, political boasting. You might start to feel a little lightheaded. The lady sitting next to you dabs at her forehead with a handkerchief, complaining of the heat from the candles. The gentleman across from you lets out a dry, hacking cough, apologizing and blaming the London fog. No one makes the connection. Why would they? The room is beautiful, the company is sparkling, the food is delicious. The idea that the very decorations creating this magical atmosphere are slowly poisoning everyone is absurd. It's science fiction. The historical debate here centers on awareness. By the mid-19th century, some doctors and scientists were beginning to raise the alarm in medical journals. But how much did this filter down to the general public, or even to the hosts of this dinner party? Was it a case of out of sight, out of mind? Historians argue that for many, the risk was simply too abstract. The candles were pretty. The flowers were lifelike. Tangible benefit of social success and aesthetic pleasure far outweighed the vague, invisible, and long-term threat of some chemical you can't see or understand. As the evening wears on, the air in the dining room grows thicker, warmer, and more laden with toxic fumes. The green candles burn down, their lethal beauty consumed in service of a single evening's entertainment. You leave the party late, feeling tired and perhaps a little unwell, but you chalk it up to too much rich food and wine. You thank your hosts for a wonderful evening. You have just survived a dinner party that was, in the most literal sense, to die for. In your bedroom with its lovely, fashionable, green wallpaper. The dinner party, with its glowing green candles and toxic floral arrangements, fades into a memory. Now, let's pull back the curtain and go behind the scenes. Let's see where those beautiful, deadly decorations actually came from. You're no longer a guest at the party, you're one of the invisible people who make such luxury possible. You find yourself in a cramped, stuffy workshop in a less than reputable part of London. The air is thick with a fine, green dust that coats every surface, catching the light from the single grimy window in an almost beautiful, sparkly haze. It gets in your throat, making you cough. It settles on your eyelashes, making your eyes itch and water. This is the world of the artificial flower maker. You are a young woman, perhaps only 16 or 17 years old. This is your job. You sit on a hard wooden stool, hunched over a workbench for 12, maybe 14 hours a day. In front of you are sheets of fabric and paper, scissors, wires, and a pot of foul-smelling glue. And next to that, a shallow bowl filled with a dry, bright green powder, Scheele green. Your task is to create leaves. Perfect lifelike leaves to accompany the silk roses and velvet violets that will eventually adorn the hats and ball gowns of wealthy women you will never meet. The process is simple and repetitive. You take a piece of starched fabric, cut it into a leaf shape, and then you dip your fingers into the green powder and rub it vigorously into the cloth. The pigment is dry and powdery, and it flies everywhere. You are told to be careful not to waste it, but no one tells you not to breathe it. Your hands are a mess. The skin is cracked, raw, and stained a sickly yellowish green. Underneath your fingernails, the poison has settled deep, creating painful sores. Sometimes, when you blow your nose, the handkerchief comes away green. You and the other girls in the workshop all have the same chronic cough, the same irritated eyes, the same feeling of perpetual, gnawing sickness in the pit of your stomach. Your boss, the workshop owner, calls it the green worker's ague. He says it's just something you get used to. He might even give you a glass of milk at the end of the day, a folk remedy that was supposed to bind the poison. It didn't, of course. One of the most tragic real-life accounts from this time is that of Matilda Scheele, a 19-year-old flower maker who worked in a London workshop just like this one. In 1861, her death became a public scandal. The autopsy revealed that her organs were saturated with arsenic. The whites of her eyes had turned green, and she had reportedly been vomiting green bile. Her death was so horrific that it was widely reported in the newspapers, and for a brief moment, the public was forced to confront the human cost of their fashion accessories. You look at the girl sitting next to you. She's new, only been here a few weeks. She's still trying to be careful to keep the dust off her face. But it's impossible. You see her lick her finger to pick up a stray piece of wire. A simple, unconscious gesture. A tiny dose of poison. You work with terrifying speed, your fingers flying. You're paid by the piece. The more leaves you make, the more pennies you earn. So you work faster, and the green dust flies thicker. You make ivy leaves, fern fronds, and delicate little sprigs of myrtle. They are beautiful. You take a strange, grim pride in your work. You are creating beauty, even if it is killing you. This is a side of the Victorian era that is oft unforgotten. For every beautiful object, there was a chain of human suffering. The exploitation of labor, particularly that of women and children, was the engine that powered the luxury market. It's a classic example of what sociologists call distancing. The lady who buys the finished hat has no connection to, and likely no knowledge of, the sick girl in the dusty workshop who made the leaves. The system was designed to keep them apart, to hide the ugly reality behind a veneer of elegance. There's a debate among labor historians about the level of agency these workers had. Were they completely helpless victims, or did they understand the risks and accept them as a grim trade-off for a wage, however meager? The evidence suggests that most knew their work was making them sick, but they had little choice. In a world with no social safety net, the choice was often between a dangerous job and starvation. They might complain to each other. They might share folk remedies. But the idea of refusing the work or demanding safer conditions was, for most, unthinkable. At the end of the long day you trudge home, your body aching. You hand over your meager earnings to your family. You try to eat, but you have no appetite. Your stomach cramps, and you feel a familiar wave of nausea. You fall into bed, and in your dreams you see leaves. Endless, beautiful, shimmering green leaves, falling like snow, blanketing the entire city in a soft, silent, poisonous shroud. You are at the epicenter of the poison, the source. And you are also its most immediate and tragic victim. Let's leave the dusty flower maker's workshop and return to your elegant middle-class home. You've been living in your beautiful green drawing room for a few months now. The initial thrill has faded into a comfortable, domestic pride. It's the backdrop to your life, but things have started to feel off. It begins subtly. You find yourself feeling tired all the time. Not just the normal end of the day tired, but a deep, weary ache in your bones that a good night's sleep doesn't seem to fix. You wake up feeling as exhausted as when you went to bed. Then comes the headaches. They start as a dull throb behind your eyes, especially after you've spent a long afternoon in the drawing room reading or sewing. Soon they become a near constant companion, a tight, pressing band of pain that makes it hard to concentrate. You start to develop a nagging dry cough. You blame the damp London air, the coal smoke, the changing seasons. Everyone has a cough in London, but this one lingers, a persistent tickle in your throat that never quite goes away. Your children, who play for hours on the floor of that very room, seem to be constantly unwell. They are pale and listless. They complain of stomach aches. They have little appetite. Your youngest has developed a strange, scaly rash on their hands and arms, which the doctor dismisses as a simple skin irritation. You look in the mirror one morning and notice your own skin looks sallow. Your eyes are puffy and red-rimmed. You feel a creeping sense of anxiety. What is wrong with this house? Is it damp? Is there a draft you haven't found? Is it built on unhealthy ground? These were the common anxieties of the time, the go-to explanations for any mysterious ailment. You spend more and more time in the drawing room, because it's the most pleasant room in the house, the one you're most proud of. You sit in your favorite armchair, a book in your lap, surrounded by the beautiful, cheerful green walls. You feel dizzy. A wave of nausea washes over you. You have to get up and go to the window for a breath of fresh London air, which does little to help. This constellation of symptoms, fatigue, headaches, nausea, skin irritation, respiratory problems, was becoming increasingly common in the homes of the well-to-do. So common, in fact, that it started to acquire a name, the wallpaper sickness. But it was a vague, catch-all term. No one knew what caused it. The victims were often women and children who spent the most time indoors. The symptoms were non-specific and could be easily mistaken for a dozen other common Victorian maladies. You go to the doctor, and he is utterly baffled. Let's imagine that visit. You sit in his dimly lit office, which smells of carbolic acid and old paper. You describe your symptoms: the exhaustion, the headaches, the nausea, the children's constant stomach troubles. The doctor, a stern-looking man with impressive sideburns, listens patiently, stroking his chin. He asks about your diet, your daily routine, the sanitation in your home. HES looking for the usual culprits: bad water, poor ventilation, miasma, the prevailing theory that disease was spread by bad air from rotting organic matter. He can find nothing obviously wrong. You live in a good neighborhood. Your home is clean and well kept. You are a respectable family. So he falls back on the most common diagnosis for any ailment in a middle-class woman that he can't easily explain: hysteria or nerves. "My dear madam," he says, his tone a mixture of condescension and paternal concern, "you are perhaps a little overwrought. The pressures of running a modern household can be quite taxing on the delicate female constitution." He might prescribe a tonic, which is probably just alcohol with some bitter herbs in it. Or he might suggest a trip to the seaside for a change of air. He certainly doesn't ask about the color of your wallpaper. Why would he? It's just paper. It's beautiful. It can't possibly be the cause of your troubles. This medical blindness is one of the most frustrating parts of the story. The clues were all there, but the medical establishment, for the most part, failed to connect the dots. The history of medicine is full of these moments, where a paradigm, in this case, the miasma theory of disease, is so powerful that it prevents doctors from seeing the real cause staring them in the face. Historians of science are still fascinated by this. How much evidence does it take to overturn a dominant scientific theory? The answer, it seems, is quite a lot, especially when the alternative involves implicating a popular, unprofitable consumer product. So you go home armed with a useless tonic, armed a diagnosis of nerves. You feel frustrated, unheard, and a little ashamed. Is it all in your head? Are you just being weak and complaining? You resolve to be stronger, to ignore the symptoms. You return to your beautiful green room. You sit down, the doctor's dismissive words ringing in your ears. The evening light streams through the window, making the arsenic-laced leaves on the wallpaper seem to glow with a soft, benevolent light. The room, which once felt like a sanctuary, a symbol of your success, is starting to feel like a prison. A beautiful, stylish, and inexplicably sickly prison. You lean your head back against the plush fabric of the armchair and close your eyes, feeling the headache begin to throb behind them once again. The secret killer is not just in the room with you, it is the room. And you have no idea. Your personal suffering, your family's mysterious decline in health, is not happening in a vacuum. You are just one small, undiagnosed case among thousands. Now, let's widen the lens and look at the bigger picture. Imagine all the doctors across Britain, and indeed across Europe and America, facing patients just like you. The medical community as a whole was scratching its collective head. You're now observing a meeting of a local medical society. A group of somber-looking men in dark suits are gathered in a wood-paneled room. The air is thick with pipe smoke and the self-important tones of professional debate. On the agenda tonight, the recent rise in obscure domestic maladies. One doctor stands up to present a case study. He describes a family, well off, living in a new, modern house. He details the symptoms: chronic fatigue, gastric distress, nervous irritation, skin eruptions. The father, who is away at his office for most of the day, suffers the least, the doctor notes. The mother and young children, who are almost always at home, suffer the most acutely. I have prescribed quinine, sea air, and a reduction in social excitements. All to no avail. Heads nod around the room. Another doctor stands up. I have 3 families in my own practice with the exact same presentation. In one case, the family moved house, and their symptoms vanished entirely, only to return when they moved back. I suspect a localized miasma, perhaps from a poorly sealed drain pipe in the vicinity. A third doctor chimes in. It is the damp. English houses are notoriously damp. It encourages the growth of molds and fungi, which surely release noxious vapors. I have advised my patients to keep their windows open at all times, even in the depths of winter, to encourage a thorough airing out. This is the great medical debate of the era, played out in miniature. They are so close yet so far. They correctly identify that the house itself is the problem. They correctly identify that staying indoors makes it worse. They even, in the case of the doctor worried about fungi, hint at a mechanism. But they miss the crucial ingredient. They are like detectives who have the murder weapon, the motive, and the opportunity, but are convinced the butler did it, when the real killer is the very air they are breathing. The diagnosis of nerves or hysteria, especially for female patients, was an incredibly common dead end. It was a convenient way to close a case that was too complex or that challenged existing medical knowledge. It placed the blame on the patient, not the environment, and required no further investigation. It's a chilling reminder of how societal biases, in this case, about the emotional and physical fragility of women, can act as a major roadblock to scientific progress. And then there was the class element. These strange illnesses were predominantly affecting the middle and upper classes. Why? Because they were the ones who could afford the fashionable, and therefore toxic, goods. The poor, living in their drab, unpainted tenements, were ironically spared this particular danger. This led to some truly bizarre theories from doctors. Some suggested that the delicate systems of the well-to-do were simply less able to cope with the rigors of modern life. Others theorized that education and reading were making women and children ill, overstimulating their sensitive brains. They looked for the answer in the lifestyle of the victims, not in the products they surrounded themselves with. Here's a quirky and sad little detail because the symptoms of chronic arsenic poisoning are so varied. Different specialists would see different parts of the problem. A patient might go to a neurologist for their headaches and fatigue, a gastroenterologist for their stomach problems, and a dermatologist for their skin rashes. Each doctor would treat their specific symptom, never seeing the full picture, never realizing that all these disparate issues stemmed from a single, common source. The family doctor, who should have been the one to connect the dots, was often just as baffled as everyone else. The academic controversy surrounding this period is not about whether doctors were incompetent, but about the nature of medical knowledge itself. When does an accumulation of anecdotal evidence, of case studies like the ones being discussed in this smoky room, cross the threshold to become accepted medical fact? The story of Scheele Green is a textbook case of this struggle. There was no single aha moment, but rather a slow, painful, and fiercely resisted process of discovery, driven by a few persistent individuals who were willing to challenge the consensus. Back in the meeting room, the discussion winds down. The conclusion is, essentially, the doctors agreed to document their cases more thoroughly. They finish their pipes, collect their hats and coats, and head out into the foggy London night, feeling that they have done their professional duty. They are learned men of science, doing their best with the knowledge they have, but they are trapped by the limitations of that knowledge. Meanwhile, in thousands of homes across the city, families are going to bed in their beautiful green rooms. The children are coughing in their sleep. The mothers are lying awake, their heads throbbing, wondering what they have done to deserve this strange, persistent sickness. The answer is on the walls all around them, shimmering in the moonlight, a silent, beautiful, and utterly unrecognized killer. The doctors were right about one thing. Even if it was for the wrong reason, the damp, the famously soggy, perpetually drizzly climate of the British Isles was not the direct cause of the sickness, but it was a crucial, deadly accomplice. It was the catalyst that turned a passive threat into an active one. Let's return to your drawing room. The green wallpaper is as beautiful as ever, but after months of enduring the damp English weather, a subtle change is taking place, especially on the walls that face outwards. You might notice a small, dark patch appearing near the corner or behind a heavy piece of furniture where the air doesn't circulate. It's mildew, a common household nuisance. You scrub it away with a damp cloth, but a few weeks later, it's back. This is life in a 19th century house. You fight a constant, losing battle against the damp. What you don't know is that this ordinary household fungus is your worst enemy. You see, certain types of fungi, particularly species like Penicillium brevis, have a peculiar and dangerous appetite. They love to feast on the flour and water. Paint was used to stick the wallpaper to the walls. As they grow and multiply in the damp, nourishing environment, they begin to interact with the wallpaper itself. Specifically, they begin to metabolize the arsenic in the Scheele's green pigment. This is where the chemistry gets really sinister. Through a process called biomethylation, the fungus ingests the solid, inorganic arsenic compounds in the pigment and effectively exhales a new substance, an arsenic-containing gas. The most common one produced was trimethylarsen. Trimethylarsen is a truly nasty piece of work. It's a volatile, colorless gas that is highly toxic, and it has a distinct, faint, garlicky smell. Remember that faint, coppery, or metallic scent you noticed in the wallpaper sharpened at the dinner party? It was likely an early hint of this process. Over time, as the mold takes hold, the smell might become more noticeable, a strange, persistent odor in the room that you can't quite identify. You might just dismiss it as the smell of damp. So your beautiful wallpaper, which was already dangerous when it was shedding dust, has now become a chemical weapon factory. It is actively pumping a poisonous gas into the air of your home. This is why the damp was such a crucial factor. In a dry climate, the arsenic would have remained largely locked in the paper, a threat only when disturbed. But in the damp of Britain, the walls themselves came alive, constantly generating a vaporous poison. This explains so much of the mystery. It explains why symptoms often got worse in the winter, when houses were closed up tight against the cold and damp, and ventilation was poor. It explains why people sometimes felt better when they went away on holiday to a drier place, only to fall sick again upon their return. Their house was literally gassing them. This gaseous theory was first proposed in the 1832 by a German chemist named Leopold Gmelin, but it was largely ignored by the medical community for decades. It seemed too far-fetched. The idea of a microscopic fungus eating a poison and breathing out an even worse, invisible poison sounded like something from a Gothic horror novel, not a scientific journal. It wasn't until the 1892 that an Italian chemist named Bartolomeo Goes-IO definitively proved the process. He developed a test where he could take a sample of moldy, arsenic-laced material, and the gas it produced, which became known as Goes-IO gas, would react in a very specific way. His work finally provided the missing link, the scientific explanation for the wallpaper sickness that had plagued people for nearly a century. This is a classic example of how a scientific mystery often requires expertise from multiple fields, in this case, medicine, chemistry, and mycology, to finally be solved. There's a fascinating, and still debated, academic point here. Some historians argue that the gaseous arsenic theory, while scientifically correct, might have been overemphasized in later popular accounts. They suggest that for many people, the primary source of poisoning was still the fine, flaky dust, which was a constant presence regardless of damp. The gas, they argue, was a contributing factor, a force multiplier in the worst case in areas of very damp, moldy houses. The truth is likely that both were happening simultaneously. Victims were being attacked onto front's solid particles. They were inhaling and touching, and a toxic gas they were breathing in, hour after hour. Back in your home, you are oblivious to this microscopic drama unfolding on your walls. You see the mildew and think unsightly. You don't realize you are looking at a colony of organisms that are actively trying to kill you. You might even decide to light a fire in the hearth to dry out the room. The heat from the fire increases the air circulation, which helps to spread the trimethylarson gas even more effectively throughout the house. You sit by the fire, trying to get warm, pulling a shawl tighter around your shoulders. You breathe in the dry air, feeling a false sense of security. But with every breath, you are drawing the invisible poison deeper into your lungs. The very thing you thought was the problem, the damp, was only the symptom. The true problem was the beautiful, deadly green that the damp had awakened. The sinister influence of this green wallpaper wasn't confined to the drawing rooms of London's middle class. Its reach extended to the highest echelons of power and became entangled in one of the most enduring mysteries of the 19th century, the death of Napoleon Bonaparte. Let's pull our focus away from your damp London home and travel to a remote, windswept rock in the middle of the South Atlantic. The year is 1821. The island is St. Helena, one of the most isolated places on earth, and the prisoner is the former emperor of the French, Napoleon Bonaparte. After his final defeat at Waterloo, the British exiled Napoleon to this inescapable island to live out his days. He resided in a place called Longwood House, a rambling, notoriously damp, and rat-infested building that the former emperor constantly complained about. He was miserable, bored, and as the years went on, increasingly sick. You find yourself standing as an unseen observer in Napoleon's final room. It's not the grand chamber of a palace, but a relatively modest space. He spends most of his time here in his final months. His health is from debilitating stomach pains, nausea, chronic fatigue, and a host of other ailments. His doctors, both British and French, are baffled. They diagnose him with everything from hepatitis to stomach cancer to simple hypochondria. In May of 1821, after months of agony, Napoleon dies at the age of 51. The official autopsy, conducted by his British captors, concludes that the cause of death was stomach cancer. Case closed. The great conqueror was laid low by a common disease. But almost immediately, rumors of foul play began to swirl. His supporters, the Bonapartists, were convinced he had been poisoned by his enemies, most likely the British governor of the island who despised him. For over a century, this remained a conspiracy theory, a romantic tale of a great man assassinated by his lesser rivals. Then, in the 1960s, the story took a scientific turn. A Swedish dentist and amateur toxicologist named Sten Fashionable became obsessed with the case. He read the detailed memoirs of Napoleon's staff, which chronicled the emperor's symptoms day by day. To Fashionable, the symptoms did not look like stomach cancer. They looked, uncannily, like chronic arsenic poisoning. To prove his theory, Fashionable managed to obtain authenticated samples of Napoleon's hair, taken at the time of his death. Using a modern technique called neutron activation analysis, he tested the hair. The results were shocking. Napoleon's hair contained arsenic levels more than 10 times the normal amount. The poison theory was suddenly back in the headlines, now with scientific evidence to back it up. But if he was poisoned, who did it? And how? This is where the story circles back to our familiar green villain. Historians began to dig into the records about Longwood House. They discovered that one of the rooms Napoleon was particularly fond of, his drawing room, had been decorated shortly before he moved in, and a surviving fragment of the wallpaper from that very house, found decades later, was analyzed. It was a bold, striking pattern with gold stars on a bright, vivid green background, a green made with arsenic. Suddenly, A new theory emerged, one that is still hotly debated by historians to this day. Was Napoleon assassinated, or was he the most famous victim of the wallpaper sickness? The argument is compelling. Longwood House was notoriously damp. The wallpaper would have been a perfect breeding ground for mold. The mold would have metabolized the arsenic pigment and released toxic trimethylation gas into the air. Napoleon, spending most of his final years cooped up inside that very house, would have been breathing it in constantly. His symptoms, the stomach pains, the fatigue, the nausea, are a textbook match for chronic arsenic poisoning. This theory offers a perfect middle ground between the official story and the conspiracy. It suggests he was poisoned, but not by a secret assassin adding arsenic to his wine. He was poisoned by his own home, by a fashionable, mass-produced consumer product that no one at the time recognized as a danger. It's a death that is both more mundane and, in a way, more ironic. The man who conquered Europe felled by a piece of cheap, pretty wallpaper. Of course, this is where we have to say academic circles are still fiercely divided. The cancer camp points out that Napoleon's father also died of stomach cancer, suggesting a genetic predisposition. They argue that the arsenic in his hair could have come from other sources, as arsenic was a common ingredient in many 19th century medicines and tonics. Some even suggest the arsenic was used as a preservative for the hair samples themselves. The poison camp counters that the pattern of arsenic deposition in the hair shaft suggests long-term exposure, not a single dose. So, what really killed Napoleon? Was it a slow-acting poison administered by a human hand? Was it the ravages of cancer? Or was he the unknowing victim of a trendy interior design choice? We will likely never know for sure. But the image is haunting the brilliant military strategist trapped on a remote island, slowly succumbing to an invisible enemy emanating from the very walls of his prison. His story, whether true or not, became a powerful, high-profile piece of evidence for those who were beginning to suspect that this beautiful green color was not as innocent as it seemed. The whispers about Napoleon's death, a dramatic story involving a famous figure, added a layer of Gothic mystery to the growing problem. But for real change to begin, the issue needed to move from the realm of rumor and isolated medical cases into the bright, unforgiving light of public discourse. That process began, as it so often does with the press. Let's rewind the clock a little from Napoleon's time and return to the heart of the issue: domestic poisoning. You're back in London, in the late 1852s. The city is a hive of print media. Newspapers, journals, and penny dreadfuls are churned out by the million, feeding a newly literate public's insatiable appetite for news, gossip, and scandal. You find yourself in a dusty, cluttered newspaper office. The air smells of ink, paper, and frantic energy. Journalists with rolled-up sleeves and ink-stained fingers are hunched over desks, scribbling furiously. A steady clatter comes from the printing presses in the basement. This is the engine room of public opinion. For years, stories about mysterious illnesses had been bubbling under the surface. A letter to the editor here, a small report on a strange death there. But they were isolated incidents, easy to dismiss. Now something is starting to change. A few determined individuals, doctors, scientists, and journalists are beginning to connect the dots and are using the power of the press to raise the alarm. Imagine you pick up a copy of the Times, the most respected newspaper in the country. Tucked away among the political reports and shipping news, you find an article with a startling headline: "The Poison on Our Walls." The article details the case of a family in which several children have died from a mysterious wasting sickness. It describes their symptoms in detail. Then, it drops the bombshell. A curious local doctor had the wallpaper in the children's nursery analyzed. Cheerful green paper was found to be saturated with arsenic. The article is cautiously worded. It uses phrases like "it is suggested that under possible link has been found," but the implication is clear and terrifying. A few weeks later, you might see a similar story in a medical journal like The Lancet. This one is more scientific, less sensational. It details the chemical composition of Scheele's green. It might include an account from a doctor who noticed that his own health improved dramatically after his own health improved or removed from his study. He describes scraping a small sample of the paper, applying a simple chemical test. and watching in horror as it confirmed the presence of large quantities of arsenic. These articles were a revelation. For people like you, sitting in your drawing room feeling perpetually unwell, it was a sudden, shocking flash of understanding. You read the description of the symptoms, and it's like reading your own diary. The fatigue, the headaches, the children's stomach upsets. It all clicks into place. You look at your beautiful green walls, not with pride, but with a dawning sense of horror. One of the most influential pieces of journalism from this period was a satirical cartoon published in Punch. The cartoon, titled The Arsenic Waltz, depicted a skeleton dancing with a fashionable young lady in a green ballgown. The room is decorated with green wallpaper, and the skeleton is gleefully sprinkling poison from a container labeled arsenic. It was a macabre, powerful image that reached a massive audience. It did what dry, scientific articles could not do. It made the danger visceral, immediate, and even a little bit scandalous. This is a key moment in the history of public health and consumer advocacy. It's the point where the burden of knowledge begins to shift from a few specialists to the general public. Before these articles, if your family got sick, it was a private tragedy. You might blame God, bad luck, or a weak constitution. But after these articles, you had a suspect. A tangible, physical culprit right there in your own home. It gave people a sense of agency they didn't have before. The problem now had a name and a face. Of course, not everyone was convinced. Many people dismissed the reports as alarmist nonsense, a passing fad, or an attack on modern industry. The idea that something so beautiful and so commonplace could be dangerous was, for many, simply too much to accept. The academic debate here focuses on the psychology of belief. Why do some people readily accept a new, uncomfortable truth while others reject it, even in the face of strong evidence? It's a question that's just as relevant today when we talk about public health crises. But the seed of doubt had been planted. And it began to grow. You, as a homeowner and a parent, are now faced with a terrible choice. Do you believe the newspapers? Do you trust this new, terrifying information? Or do you trust the reassurances of the shopkeeper who sold you the paper, the one who told you it was the very latest in modern, scientific design? You look at your pale, listless children. You think of your own constant, nagging ailments. You look at the walls, and the beautiful green leaves of the Arbor Delight pattern suddenly seem to mock you. They look less like a symbol of spring and more like a warning. The media has given you the information. What you do with it is now up to you. The battle for public opinion has begun. The media expose has thrown a stone into the placid pond of public opinion, and the ripples are spreading. Panic, however, is not the only reaction. For every concerned homeowner beginning to eye their walls with suspicion, there's a powerful force pushing back, trying to calm the waters and protect its own interests. This is the moment the industry strikes back. Your newfound fear and suspicion are now met with a wall of confident, professional denial. The manufacturers of pigments and wallpapers were not about to let a few alarmist newspaper articles destroy their incredibly profitable business. They launched what we would today call a full-blown public relations campaign. Imagine you see an advertisement in a popular magazine. It's not for a specific brand of wallpaper, but for the industry itself. It might feature an illustration of a happy, healthy, and very well-dressed family enjoying their bright, cheerful home, a home decorated, of course, with green wallpaper. The text below is reassuring, authoritative, and dismissive. A note of reassurance to our valued customers. The headline might read, "You may have recently encountered certain sensationalist reports regarding the safety of modern colored wallpapers. We wish to state, in the strongest possible terms, that these claims are baseless and not founded in scientific fact. Our products are crafted by the finest artisans using the most modern chemical processes. They are perfectly stable in pose, absolutely no risk to health when used as intended." This is a masterclass in corporate doublespeak. Notice the phrase "when used as intended." The implication is that if any harm does occur, it's because the consumer has misused the product, not because the product itself is inherently dangerous. It's a classic tactic to shift blame. The manufacturers also sought out their own experts to counter the claims of the concerned doctors. They would fund studies by chemists who would, unsurprisingly, conclude that the arsenic in the wallpaper was perfectly bound to the paper and could not possibly be released into the air. These paid-for opinions would then be published as letters to the editor in major newspapers, creating the impression of a legitimate scientific debate. On the one hand, some doctors believed there might be a risk. The public was told, but on the other hand, established men of science have proven that it is safe. For the average person, it was impossible to know who to believe. You, as the homeowner, might even go back to the shop where you bought the wallpaper, armed with a newspaper clipping. The shopkeeper, who was so charming and helpful before, now adopts a slightly more defensive tone. "Ah, yes, this nonsense," he might say, waving a dismissive hand at your article. "Pure hysteria, madam. Believe me, if there was any real danger, do you think Her Majesty the Queen would have it in Buckingham Palace? We sell thousands of rolls of this paper a week, thousands. And you are the first person to come in with such a fanciful complaint. Perhaps you should be more concerned about the drains in your house than the paper on your walls." He has a point, and it's a powerful one. The "everyone else is doing it" argument is incredibly persuasive. And the appeal to authority, the Queen is the trump card. It was a well-known fact that green was a favorite color in the royal residences. While some historians debate the specifics, it's widely believed that arsenic-laced wallpapers were indeed used in Buckingham Palace and other royal homes. The thinking was, if it's safe enough for royalty, it's surely safe enough for me. This aspect of the story highlights the immense power of social inertia and commercial interests in resisting public health reforms. It's a pattern that has repeated itself throughout history, with asbestos, lead paint, tobacco, and countless other products. There's a fascinating ongoing debate among historians and economists. Is this purely a story of corporate greed, of companies knowingly poisoning their customers for profit, or is it more complex, a story of genuine belief in their own products, of a cultural blindness to a new type of industrial risk? Some manufacturers may have genuinely believed their own PR, convinced that the fears were overblown. Others, it is almost certain, knew the dangers but prioritized profits over public safety. The wallpaper industry even tried to turn the argument on its head, framing the anti-arsenic movement as being anti-progress and anti-beauty. An editorial, likely funded by a manufacturers' association, might argue, these alarmists would have us return to the drab, colorless homes of our ancestors. They wish to rob the modern family that modern chemistry has brought into our lives, So now you are caught in a crossfire. On one side, you have your own failing health, your sick children, and the stark warnings from the press. On the other, you have the confident reassurances of industry, the dismissiveness of shopkeepers, and the powerful example of high society. To tear down that expensive, beautiful wallpaper would be a huge undertaking. It would be an admission that you had made a terrible, costly mistake. It would mean siding with the hysterical journalists against the sensible men of industry. It's so much easier, so much more comfortable to believe that it's all just a fuss about nothing. Maybe the doctor was right. Maybe it's just your nerves. In the confusing crossfire between media warnings and industry denials, what you desperately need is a champion. A clear, authoritative voice to cut through the noise. While the medical community as a whole was slow to react, a few courageous individuals did step forward, often at great personal and professional risk. Let's imagine you are attending a public health lecture in a stuffy, gas-lit hall. The audience is a mix of concerned citizens, skeptical doctors, and perhaps even a few scowling representatives from the wallpaper trade. The speaker is not a wild-eyed radical, but a respected physician, a man like Dr. Henry Letty, a real-life public analyst and medical officer for the City of London. He stands at the podium, not with fiery rhetoric but with cold, hard facts. He doesn't just talk about vague illnesses, he presents case studies, one after another. Case the first, he might begin, his voice steady and clear. A family of 5 in Illingston. The 2 youngest children, who shared a nursery decorated in a cheerful green pattern, died within 6 months of each other. The parents and the eldest child, who slept in a different room, remained in good health. Upon my own investigation, I had the nursery wallpaper analyzed. It contained by weight over 40% arsenic. A murmur goes through the crowd. He continues relentless. Case the second, a gentleman of letters who complained of debilitating headaches and a strange paralysis in his hands, which prevented him from writing. His study, where he spent upwards of 10 hours a day, was papered in a green flock design. After removing the paper, his symptoms gradually subsided over a period of 4 months. He has now made a full recovery. He holds up two pieces of wallpaper. One is a familiar vibrant green. The other is a drab-looking brown. Both are beautiful in their own way, he might say, but one is a simple decoration. The other, he pauses for effect, is a loaded weapon hanging on your walls. This is a new kind of argument. It's not based on theory or speculation. It's based on evidence, on a pattern of sickness and recovery directly linked to the presence or absence of the green wallpaper. These doctors were acting as medical detectives, meticulously gathering the clues that others had overlooked. One of the most powerful tools in their arsenal was the chemical test. They would go into the homes of their sick patients and perform a simple, dramatic demonstration. One famous test, developed by the chemist James Marsh, was incredibly sensitive to arsenic. A doctor could scrape a tiny amount of pigment from the wall, subject it to a chemical reaction, and produce a silvery black deposit of pure arsenic on a piece of cold porcelain. Imagine this doctor in your own drawing room. He has listened to your story, his expression serious and sympathetic, unlike the dismissive physician you saw before. He says, "I have a suspicion. May I?" He then scrapes a fleck of green from behind a picture frame, pulls out a small kit of vials and a spirit lamp, and performs the test right there on your mantelpiece. You watch, holding your breath, as the telltale metallic stain appears. It's irrefutable proof. It is in your home. These crusading doctors faced immense pushback. They were accused of being self-promoting quacks, of creating public hysteria to further their own careers. The manufacturers, with their deep pockets, tried to discredit them in the press. Their more conservative colleagues in the medical profession often shunned them, viewing them as ungentlemanly agitators. Historians of public health see these figures as pivotal. They represent the birth of a new kind of medical professional, the public health advocate. Their concern wasn't just treating individual patients, but identifying and eliminating the environmental causes of disease on a community-wide scale. The debate about whether their primary motivation was pure scientific altruism or a desire for professional recognition is ongoing. Some academics argue that in the competitive medical marketplace of the 19th century, taking a controversial public stand was a way to build a reputation. But whatever their motivations, their actions saved lives. Dr. Letty By, for example, didn't just lecture. He used his official position to campaign for change. He wrote scathing reports, testified at government inquests, and tirelessly advocated for legislation to ban or regulate the use of arsenic in consumer goods. He and others, like him, were the bridge between the sickbed and the Houses of Parliament. As you stand at the back of that lecture hall or watch the chemical test on your own mantelpiece, the confusion begins to lift. The reassurances of the industry now sound hollow and self-serving. The dismissiveness of your first doctor seems like willful ignorance. This new doctor, this advocate, has given you not just an answer, but a call to action. The fear is still there, but now it's mixed with a new, empowering emotion, anger. And with it, the resolve to do something about it. You are no longer a passive victim of a mysterious ailment. You are now an informed consumer, and you know exactly what you need to do next. The doctor's demonstration, that stark, metallic stain on the porcelain, has armed you with a terrible certainty. The poison is real, but what now? You can't afford to hire a chemist to test every colored item in your house. The feeling of helplessness begins to creep back in. You're surrounded by potential threats, but how do you identify them? This is where knowledge trickles down from the lecture halls and medical journals into the realm of domestic science and, believe it or not, household tips. As public awareness grew, a demand arose for simple, do-it-yourself methods to detect arsenic. People wanted to become their own detective. Let's imagine you're reading a ladies' magazine, a popular weekly publication full of fashion plates, recipes, and household advice. Tucked between a recipe for seed cake and a pattern for a knitted shawl, you find a small, sensational article: is there a murderer in your home? A simple test for the poisonous green. The article describes in simple terms the dangers of arsenic-laced wallpapers and fabrics. Then it offers a solution, a test you can perform yourself using common household chemicals. It's a simplified version of the tests the chemists were using, adapted for the domestic kitchen. The most popular home test was surprisingly simple. You are instructed to take a sample of the suspect material: a scrap of wallpaper from behind a sofa, a small snip from the hem of a green dress, or even a green painted toy. You place the sample on a saucer. Then, you go to your pantry or medicine cabinet and get the secret ingredient: ammonia. A common household cleaning agent, smelling sharp and pungent. You are told to pour a generous amount of the ammonia solution onto the sample and let it sit. You decide to try it. You peel a small strip of wallpaper from an inconspicuous corner of your drawing room. Your heart is pounding a little. Part of you wants the test to fail, to prove this has all been a terrible misunderstanding. You place the green paper on a saucer and fetch the bottle of ammonia. As you pour the clear liquid over the paper, the chemical reaction is immediate and dramatic. The brilliant green of the paper begins to dissolve. The ammonia, which was clear, starts to turn a beautiful, vibrant, and terrifying shade of blue. The article explains that the ammonia is reacting with the copper in the Scheele's green pigment, which, you'll remember, is copper arsenite. This blue color is the telltale sign of copper. And where there was copper in a green pigment of this era, there was almost certainly arsenic. Some instructions went a step further. They told you to then take the now blue liquid and drop a crystal of silver nitrate into it, something you might have if you were an amateur photographer, a popular hobby at the time. If a yellow precipitate formed at the bottom of the saucer, it was a near certain confirmation of arsenic. You stare at the saucer. The wallpaper sample is now a pale, sickly yellow-grey, and it's sitting in a pool of vivid blue liquid. There's no ambiguity, no room for doubt or denial. It's like a magic trick that reveals a horrifying truth. This empowerment through domestic science is a fascinating and often overlooked aspect of the story. It took the power out of the hands of experts and, particularly women, who were the primary managers of the home. It was a form of grassroots public health activism. Women would share these tests with their friends and neighbors at tea parties. "My dear, have you tested your nursery paper? You simply must. All you need is a bit of ammonia." Of course, these home tests weren't perfectly reliable. They could sometimes give false positives or negatives, and they led to a new kind of paranoia. People started testing everything. Green candles, green book bindings, the green labels on tinned food, green sweets from the confectioner. A strange, color-specific panic began to set in. One of the quirky side effects of this home testing craze was the spread of chemical knowledge. Ladies' magazines started publishing articles that explained the basic chemistry in simple terms, turning housewives into amateur toxicologists. It's a strange case of a public health crisis inadvertently promoting scientific literacy. Historians who study domestic life in this period see this as a significant moment. It marks a shift in how people viewed their homes. The home was no longer just a sanctuary from the dirty, dangerous outside world. The dangers people were realizing could be inside, woven into the very fabric of their domestic lives, hidden in the most beautiful and fashionable objects. The home became a place that needed to be managed, policed, and made safe through vigilance and knowledge. There's a continuing scholarly discussion about the class dimension of this. While the magazines and know-how were aimed at the middle class, what about the poor? The factory girls making the artificial flowers or the workers in the pigment factories didn't have the luxury of testing their environment, they were immersed in it. The ability to test your home was itself a privilege. But for you, in your drawing room, staring at that blue saucer, it is a moment of profound clarity. The debate is over. The denial is shattered. You now have the evidence in your own hands. The next step is obvious, and it's going to be messy. You have to get the poison out of your house. Armed with the horrifying knowledge from your home chemistry experiment, you now see the world differently. The beautiful green that once symbolized taste and modernity now looks like a skull and crossbones. And you aren't alone. As public awareness and anxiety grow, they begin to influence the tastemakers themselves, the artists, designers, and thinkers who shape the aesthetic of the age. No figure is more central to this shift than the great designer, artist, and socialist thinker William Morris. Let's bring him into our story. At first, Morris and his company, Morris Marshall Faulkner Co., were just like everyone else. They were captivated by the new brilliant pigments. In the 1862, they produced some of their most iconic and beautiful wallpapers, designs like trellis, daisy, and fruit, using the brightest, most vibrant greens available. And at the time, that meant arsenic greens. Imagine visiting the first Morris Co. shop in London. It's a revelation. A rebellion against the fussy, ornate, machine-made fussances of mainstream Victorian design. Here, everything is about craftsmanship, beauty, and harmony with nature. The wallpapers are intricate, flowing, and inspired by the plants and flowers of the English countryside. And many of them are gloriously, unapologetically green. Morris himself loved green, seeing it as the essential color of life and nature. For years he used arsenic-based pigments, and for years he was a staunch defender of their use. This is one of the great ironies of the story. William Morris, the man who championed craftsmanship and the well-being of the worker, was profiting from and decorating homes with unknown poison. He was not ignorant of the rumors. He was well aware of the arsenic scare, but he dismissed it, subscribing to the industry's line of defense. There is a famous, and frankly quite damning, quote attributed to him from a letter he wrote when a client complained that the green wallpaper might be making him sick. Morris is said to have responded that the arsenic was a bug he got up by the doctors and that the dust rubbed off the paper was all a fable. He suggested the man's illness was likely due to the bugs in his bed. It's a shocking statement from a man we now regard as a progressive hero. This is a point of real contention for Morris scholars and biographers. How could the great socialist, the man who cared so deeply about creating a better world, be so callous? Some argue it was a simple blind spot, a case of a brilliant man being stubbornly wrong about one particular issue. Others suggest that his own business interests, his company was a major producer of these wallpapers, clouded his judgment. He was, after all, a businessman as well as an artist. He may have been in a state of willful denial, unwilling to accept that his beautiful creations were causing harm. But then, something began to change. The evidence became too overwhelming to ignore. Perhaps it was the persistent work of the public health advocates. Perhaps it was seeing the effects firsthand. The story goes that workers in his own factories were getting sick, particularly those involved in the dyeing and printing processes. The turning point seems to have been in the late 1870s. Morris Co. began to actively experiment with new non-arsenical dyes. This wasn't easy. The new vegetable-based or mineral-based greens were often less vibrant, more difficult to fix to the paper, and more expensive to produce. They required a complete overhaul of his production process. But Morris, to his credit, eventually committed to the change. He became a convert. The man who had once defended arsenic greens now became a champion of the non-arsenical movement. His company started to explicitly advertise their wallpapers and fabrics as being guaranteed free from arsenic. This became a major selling point. It was a marketing strategy, yes, but it was also a powerful ethical statement. Imagine seeing one of these new Morris Co. advertisements. It might feature one of his famous, flowing patterns, like the willow bough. The text would proudly proclaim beauty, craftsmanship, and perfect safety. All Morris Co. wallpapers are now colored with purely vegetable dyes, ensuring a healthy and beautiful home. This was a game changer. When a designer of William Morris's stature, the ultimate arbiter of taste for the high-minded, artistic middle class, took a stand, people listened. He made arsenic free not just a matter of safety, but a matter of good taste. It became fashionable to be concerned about the health of your home. Choosing a Morris paper was now a way to signal not only your artistic sensibility but also your enlightened, modern, scientific outlook. You weren't just buying wallpaper, you were buying into an ethical and aesthetic philosophy. Moori's journey from denier to advocate mirrors the broader societal shift. It shows how difficult, slow, and complicated the process of change can be, even for well-intentioned and intelligent people. His story reminds us that historical figures are rarely simple heroes or villains. They are complex people, capable of both brilliant insight and profound blind spots. The ongoing historical discussion about Maurice's Arsenic period is a testament to this complexity. Was his eventual change of heart a genuine moral awakening, or a savvy business move to get ahead of inevitable government regulation and capture a new, health-conscious market? The most likely answer is that it was a bit of both, but whatever the mix of motivations, the result was the same. The most famous designer of the age had declared war on Scheele's green, and that was a battle the toxic pigment could not win. The tide is turned. The warnings from doctors, the exposures in the press, and the conversion of tastemakers like William Morris have created a critical mass of public opinion. The beautiful green is no longer just a symbol, it's a stigma. And for you, the homeowner, the time for deliberation is over. The time for action has come. You are standing in your drawing room, the room that was once your greatest pride. The ammonia test saucer is still on the mantelpiece, a small monument to your shattered innocence. The beautiful, leafy green wallpaper seems to mock you, its cheerfulness now sinister. You can't stand to be in the room for another minute. You can't let your children breathe this air for another night. It has to go, all of it, now. You don't call for workmen. You are seized by a frantic, furious energy, a mixture of fear and rage. You pull on an old apron. You find a bucket, fill it with hot water, and grab a scraper. This isn't a redecoration project, it's an exorcism. You start in a corner, digging the edge of the scraper under the paper. It resists at first, then gives way with a dry, tearing sound. You pull, and a large strip comes away from the wall, revealing the pale, naked plaster beneath. As the paper comes off, a cloud of fine, greenish dust billows into the air. The dust you now know is laden with arsenic. You hold your breath, maybe tie a handkerchief over your mouth and nose, but it's a futile gesture. The air is quickly becoming thick with the poison you are trying to remove. Your children are watching from the doorway, their eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and excitement at this sudden destructive act. "Why are you tearing the pretty leaves, Mama?" one of them might ask. And what can you say? Because they are poison. Because they have been making us sick. It's a terrifying thing to have to explain to a child. You work with a desperate energy. You scrape and pull, your arms aching. The floor becomes littered with torn, damp strips of the offending paper. The work is slow, messy, and grimly satisfying. With every piece you remove, you feel a small sense of victory, of reclaiming your home from the silent intruder. This scene was repeated in thousands of middle and upper-class homes across the country. A wave of degreening swept through fashionable society. It was a mass consumer panic, the 19th century equivalent of a product recall, but one that was carried out by the consumers themselves. Imagine the sheer scale of the waste. All that expensive wallpaper, all those beautiful fabrics, now viewed as toxic. They were ripped out, torn down, and thrown away. There are anecdotal accounts of huge bonfires in the back gardens of wealthy homes, where families would burn the cursed wallpaper, green dresses, and even furniture, sending plumes of arsenic-laced smoke up into the London sky. It was probably not the safest disposal method, but it was certainly a cathartic one. This created a strange secondary market. Less scrupulous dealers would sometimes collect the discarded poison papers and resell them to less informed or less wealthy customers who were eager to get a fashionable look on the cheap. The poison was simply passed down the social ladder. The emotional toll of this moment is something historians of emotion and domestic life are deeply interested in. What did it feel like to discover that you had, through your own choices, your own desire for beauty and status, endangered your family? The sense of guilt must have been immense. The anger at the manufacturers and shopkeepers who had lied and misled you would have been white hot. This wasn't just a financial loss, it was a profound betrayal. There's an ongoing debate about the long-term psychological impact of this scare. Did it create a lasting tekenboffier, a suspicion of chemical colors and a preference for natural materials that influenced the arts and crafts movement and later design trends? Or was the memory short but eagerly embracing the next new chemical dye to come along, provided it was marketed as safe? The evidence suggests a bit of both. But it did plant the first seeds of modern consumer protection and environmental consciousness. Back in your drawing room, the work is finally done. The walls are bare, scarred with the marks of the scraper. The air is hazy with dust. You are covered in sweat and grime. You look around at the devastation, at the piles of torn paper. The room is ugly now. But it feels clean. It feels safe. For the first time in a long time, you take a deep breath, and it feels like you can actually breathe. The headache that has been your constant companion for months seems to have already lessened its grip. You gather up the poisonous debris. You will have it burned. Tomorrow you will wash down every surface in this room. And then you will choose a new wallpaper, something simple. A nice, safe, sensible cream. Or maybe a cheerful yellow, anything but green. You've purged the poison from your own home, a personal, frantic act of self-preservation. But your individual action, multiplied by thousands of others, starts to create a larger pressure. A question begins to hang in the air, debated in newspaper editorials and parliamentary committees. If the substance is so dangerous, why isn't the government doing something? This is where the story moves from the domestic sphere to the political one. And you quickly discover that the wheels of government grind exceedingly slow, especially when they have to roll over the powerful interests of industry. Let's shift our perspective to the hallowed, wood-panelled halls of the British Parliament. A committee has been formed to investigate the sale of poisons. You're an observer in the public gallery, watching the proceedings. It's a formal, stately affair, but underneath the calm surface, a battle is being waged. On one side, you have the advocates for reform. Doctors like Henry Lettiby and others present their chilling evidence. They bring their case files, their chemical analysis reports, and even samples of the toxic wallpapers themselves. They pass around a roll of beautiful green paper, and the members of Parliament, who likely have the very same paper in their own homes, handle it with a new, nervous respect. A doctor might be asked, in your professional opinion, sir, is the presence of this wallpaper in a domestic setting a significant threat to public health? And the answer comes back, firm and clear. It is not a threat, it is an active and persistent danger. I have seen families destroyed by it. I have seen children die. To continue to allow the unfettered sale of such a product is, in my view, a national disgrace. Then comes the rebuttal. On the other side of the room are the representatives of the industry, the owners of pigment factories and wallpaper manufacturers, along with their lawyers and paid scientific experts. They are calm, well-dressed, and deeply persuasive. When it's their turn to speak, they don't deny that the wallpaper contains arsenic. That fact is now undeniable. Instead, they pivot. They argue about freedom, commerce, and personal responsibility. A factory owner might say, "Gentlemen, arsenic is a substance with many important industrial uses. Are we to ban it entirely? That would be crippling to our nation's industry. The wallpaper trade alone employs thousands of hard-working Britons. Are we to throw them out of work because of a few, unsubstantiated cases of so-called illness?" They argue that the dose makes the poison. There is more arsenic in a single dose of some prescribed medicines than in an entire room's worth of wallpaper dust, one of their experts might claim, a statement that is misleading but sounds plausible. They also make a powerful free market argument. It is not the role of the government to legislate taste or to act as a nursemaid for the public. If a customer wishes to purchase a green wallpaper, they should be free to do so. And if they are concerned, they are free to choose another color. The market will decide. This argument, championing individual liberty and limited intervention, was extremely compelling in the laissez-faire climate of 19th century Britain. The slowness of the legal process is a major theme for historians studying this era. Why did it take so long? Decades, in fact, from the time the danger was first identified until meaningful legislation was passed. Part of the answer lies in this powerful industrial lobby. But there were other factors too. The scientific evidence was still considered controversial by some. There was no single, definitive study, but rather a slow accumulation of anecdotal and case-based evidence, which was easier for politicians to dismiss. Furthermore, there was a genuine philosophical debate about the role of the state. The idea of consumer protection as we know it today simply did not exist. The prevailing doctrine was caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. It was considered your own responsibility to ensure the products you bought were safe. The government's job was to protect property and national security, not to inspect wallpaper. This is a point still debated by legal historians and political scientists. Was the slow pace of legislation a failure of the political system, corrupted by money and influence? Or was it a reflection of the dominant political ideology of the time, which prioritized economic freedom above all else? The answer is probably a messy combination of both. You, watching from the gallery, feel a rising sense of frustration. The arguments of the manufacturers sound so reasonable, so logical, in this formal setting. They expertly sound out and minimize the risk. The doctor's passionate warnings begin to seem a little emotional, a little hysterical, by comparison. Eventually some laws were passed, like the Arsenic Act of 1851. But they were weak and full of loopholes. They mainly focused on regulating the sale of raw arsenic to prevent its use in outright murder, requiring it to be colored with soot or indigo, so it couldn't be secretly added to food. But they did almost nothing to restrict its use in industrial manufacturing. A factory could still buy arsenic by the ton to make pigments. It wasn't until the end of the century, when public opinion was overwhelmingly against the practice and, crucially, when safe alternatives were widely available, that the use of arsenic in wallpaper and paint finally died out. The law didn't lead the change, it followed it. You leave the parliamentary hearing feeling disheartened. You've won the battle in your own home. But the war is far from over. The system is powerful, and it is resistant to change. The beautiful, deadly green will remain on sale legally for many years to come. The slow, grinding pace of legal reform is frustrating. But while the politicians debated, another force was already at work, driven by the most powerful engine of all market demand. With arsenic-free becoming a fashionable selling point, the race was on to find a new safe and equally brilliant green. The fall of Scheele's green created a vacuum in the market, a green-colored hole that chemists and manufacturers were desperate to fill. This is where our story shifts from public health to industrial chemistry, from a story of poison to a story of innovation. Let's travel to a different kind of workshop. Not the dusty, deadly artificial flower factory, but a bright, modern chemical laboratory in Germany or France in the latter part of the 19th century. This is the new frontier. The air doesn't smell of garlic and damp, but of strange, sharp, coal tar derivatives. This is the dawn of the synthetic dye industry. You see a chemist in a white lab coat, surrounded by a complex web of glass tubing, beakers, and Bunsen burners. He's not messing about with toxic minerals dug from the ground. He's working with a byproduct of the coal gas industry, a thick, black, smelly sludge called coal tar. For years, this stuff was just an industrial waste product. But chemists had discovered that within this ugly sludge was a treasure trove of organic molecules, but could be transformed into an incredible rainbow of colors. The first major breakthrough had already happened in 1856, when a young chemist named William Henry Perkin accidentally created a brilliant purple dye he called Mauvigny while trying to synthesize quinine. This discovery launched the synthetic dye industry. Now, a generation later, chemists were systematically trying to create every color imaginable from the same source. The challenge with green was significant, creating stable, bright reds, blues, and purples had proven relatively straightforward, but green was elusive. Our chemist is trying to solve this puzzle. He carefully mixes chemicals, heats them, cools them, distills them. He records every step in a thick ledger. Many of his experiments result in a disappointing brown sludge. This quest for a new green wasn't just about public safety, it was about enormous profits. The manufacturer who could patent first cheap, safe, and vibrant synthetic green would make a fortune. It was a chemical arms race fought not with weapons, but with beakers and formulas. Finally, a breakthrough. In 1878, the German chemical company BASF which would go on to become a global giant, patented one of the first successful synthetic greens. They created it by reacting various cold or derivatives in a complex, multi-step process. The result was a new class of pigments, the aniline greens. Imagine the moment of discovery. The chemist pours one clear liquid into another, and suddenly the solution flashes into a deep, vibrant green. It's a clean, pure color with none of the toxic baggage of the arsenic compounds. It's a moment of pure scientific triumph. These new synthetic greens had several advantages. They were, of course, non-toxic, which was their biggest selling point, but they were also more stable and lightfast than many of the old mineral and vegetable dyes, and once the industrial process was perfected, they could be mass-produced with a consistency and purity that was impossible with the old methods. However, there were trade-offs. And this is where historians of technology and design find interesting tensions. The very first synthetic greens were sometimes seen as too brilliant, too uniform. They lacked the subtle, complex, and sometimes slightly imperfect character of the old mineral pigments. William Morris, for all his eventual championing of arsenic-free, was initially very skeptical of the new synthetic dyes, which he derisively called aniline dyes. And he much preferred the softer tones of the traditional vegetable dyes he was trying to revive. This created a split in the market. On one side, you had the high-end, artistic natural greens, championed by the arts and crafts movement. On the other, you had the cheap, brilliant, and safe synthetic greens, which were quickly adopted by the mass market. The academic debate here focuses on the impact of this technological shift. Did the rise of synthetic dyes democratize color, making brilliant, safe hues available to everyone, not just the rich? Or did it lead to a loss of craft, a homogenization of the color palette, and a disconnect from the natural world? The answer, as always, is complex. It did both. You, as a consumer who has just stripped the arsenic paper from your walls, are now presented with a new world of choice. You go back to the wallpaper shop. The shopkeeper, eager to win back your business, proudly shows you the new collections. Completely non-arsenical, I assure you, he says, unrolling a sample. This is the latest thing. A new aniline green, perfectly safe. And what a splendid color. The new green is indeed splendid. It's bright, cheerful, and perhaps a little bit flat compared to the dangerous shimmer of the old Scheele's green. But it is the color of safety. It is the color of progress. It is the color of a future where you don't have to be afraid of your own home. You choose a pattern, a fresh, modern design in a lovely, safe, synthetic shade of apple green. The long, dark chapter of the poison green is finally coming to a close, not just because of laws or protests, but because science and industry had finally provided a better, safer alternative. The killer color was being replaced, one roll of wallpaper at a time. The chemists have provided the solution, and the manufacturers are eagerly adopting the new, safe synthetic dyes. The revolution that began in your drawing room is now sweeping through the marketplace. But what about the world you left behind, the world of high fashion, of shimmering green ball gowns and elegant accessories? That world too must detoxify. Let's return to the hushed, elegant atelier of the Parisian dressmaker. The mood has changed. The brilliant, almost fluorescent shimmer of Scheele's green is nowhere to be seen. That color is now tainted by scandal. It's no longer the height of fashion, it's a dangerous faux pas. To be seen in a dress of that particular shade would be like admitting you are hopelessly out of touch, or worse, that you don't care about the well-being of the pool factory girls who were rumored to have died making it. Fashion, more than any other industry, is driven by the new. And the new thing is safety. You, as a fashionable lady of society, are once again shopping for a dress for the season's most important ball. The dressmaker unrolls bolts of fabric for your consideration. You are looking for a green, mademoiselle? She asks, a knowing look in her eye. But of course, it is a very intellectual color this season. A statement of awareness. She doesn't show you the garish, electric greens of a few years ago. Instead, she shows you fabrics dyed in softer, more muted shades. There are olive greens, moss greens, and sage greens. These are the colors of the aesthetic movement, a new style that rejected the harsh, artificial colors of the early industrial age in favor of more natural ammonia stones. These were the colors championed by Oscar Wilde and his followers. To wear these colors was to signal that you were artistic, sensitive, and, most importantly, not a walking poison hazard. The dressmaker might show you a bolt of silk dyed a lovely, soft sea green. This, she says with reverence, is dyed with the new aniline colors. From Germany, perfectly safe, and so much more. Refined, do you not think? The fashion industry had brilliantly co-opted the public health crisis and turned it into a trend. Arsenic-free became a mark of luxury and sophistication. The very magazines that had once celebrated the brilliance of Scheele's green now ran articles praising the subtle artistic beauty of the new, safer color palette. A fashion plate might show a woman in a sage green dress with the caption Mrs. A looking divinely modern in a gown of the new, harmless green. This created a fascinating and somewhat cynical cycle of consumption. All those women who had spent a fortune on their arsenic green ball gowns a few years ago now had to spend another fortune to replace them with the new, healthy colors. The industry, far from being hurt by the crisis, had found a way to profit from it by creating a new wave of planned obsolescence. This detoxification extended beyond dresses. Green accessories, which had once been so popular, were now viewed with suspicion. Green feathers in hats, green ribbons, green gloves all were replaced with safer alternatives. It's a quirky historical footnote that for a while at the end of the 19th century, green itself became a slightly unlucky and unfashionable color in some circles, tainted by its toxic path. It took a generation for it to fully recover and be embraced again without a shadow of suspicion. The academic debate here focuses on the drivers of this change. Was the fashion world responding to genuine consumer fear and a moral awakening? Or was it simply a classic case of the industry sensing a shift in the wind and cleverly repositioning itself to capitalize on a new trend? The truth, as is so often the case in fashion, is that it was both. The designers and taste makers were part of the same society that was reading the scary newspaper articles. But they were also brilliant business people who knew how to turn a crisis into an opportunity. There's also the question of the workers. While the switch to aniline dyes was certainly safer for the end consumer, the early synthetic dye factories were not exactly health spas. They involved working with volatile and sometimes carcinogenic chemicals. The danger was shifted from a slow, creeping poison in the home to a more acute industrial hazard in the factory. The fashion industry had cleaned up its image, but the human cost of producing cheap, colorful textiles had not disappeared, it had just changed its chemical formula. As you stand in the dressmaker's shop, you choose a beautiful silk dyed a soft, watery celadon green. It doesn't have the shocking, eye-catching vibrancy of the old arsenic taffeta, but it feels elegant, sophisticated, and, above all, safe. When you wear it to the ball, you are making a statement. You are part of the new, enlightened set. You are demonstrating your good taste and your social conscience. You might even find yourself in conversation with another lady who might whisper, "I simply had to throw out my old green moire. I heard the most dreadful stories." You would nod in solemn agreement. The fashion world had successfully detoxed. The green ghost of arsenic had been exorcised from the ballroom, replaced by the chic, safe, and highly profitable greens of the modern chemical age. The grand narratives of industrial chemistry, fashion trends, and parliamentary debates are crucial to our story. But what about the quiet, personal stories of the people who lived through this toxic era? What happened to the thousands of individuals like you, who spent years breathing in poison without knowing it? What did survival look like? Let's step away from the public stage and into the quiet intimacy of a personal diary. The science and the politics fade into the background, and we are left with the human experience. The perspective is once again yours, but years have passed. The green wallpaper is a distant, nightmarish memory. The house is safe now, but the ghost of the poison lingers. You are writing in a journal, reflecting on the strange sickness that defined a whole chapter of your life. It is a relief, of course, to know the course, to know the cause you might write, to have a name for the beast that haunted our home for so long. But knowledge is not a cure. The doctors say the poison has left my system, but I do not believe it. There is a weariness in my bones that was never there before, a fragility. This is the grim reality of chronic arsenic poisoning. Even after the source of the exposure is removed, the long-term health effects can be profound and permanent. Arsenic can cause damage to the nervous system, the liver, the skin, and the heart. The symptoms might fade, but a full return to a previous state of health was often impossible. You write about your children. My darling Anna still suffers from her weak digestion. The doctors call it a sensitive stomach, but I know what it is. It is the memory of the poison she ingested from the paint on her little wooden soldiers. I see her paleness, her lack of childish energy, and the guilt as a physical weight in my chest. I, her mother, filled her world with poison because it was pretty. This sense of guilt is a recurring theme in the fragmented personal accounts that have survived from this period in letters, diaries, and family memoirs. There was a profound sense of having been both a victim and an unwitting perpetrator. A victim of the manufacturers who lied, but a perpetrator in the context of one's own family. How do you make peace with the fact that your pursuit of fashion and status may have permanently harmed your children? Through these imagined diary entries we can explore the long, slow recovery. You might describe the lingering symptoms, the slight tremor in your hands that makes your handwriting shaky, the strange, tingling numbness that sometimes appears in your feet, the way your skin is still prone to unexplained rashes. These were the mysterious after effects that doctors had no name for and no cure for. There is a historical debate among medical historians about the true extent of this long-term, low-level damage. How many Victorian invalids, those semi-permanent residents of the fainting couch, were not suffering from hysteria or neurasthenia, but from the lasting neurological consequences of arsenic exposure? It's impossible to quantify, but many now believe that the wallpaper sickness cast a very long shadow, contributing to a baseline of poor health that was simply accepted as a normal part of life. You might also write about the social aftermath. I saw Mrs. B at the market today. She was one of the first to tear down her green paper, and she now holds herself as a great authority. She gives me a knowing, pitying look, as if I were a fool for not realizing the danger sooner. There is a new social hierarchy. It seems the clever ones who knew, and the rest of us who were poisoned. We do not speak of it openly, but the judgment is there. This gives us a glimpse into the strange social dynamics of a post-panic world. There would have been blame, shame, and a rewriting of personal histories. People who had once proudly shown off their green rooms would now deny ever having liked the color. The shared trauma could create bonds, but it could also create divisions. A particularly poignant detail that emerges from some real accounts is the loss of sensory pleasure. You might write, I find I can no longer look upon the color green with any joy. I see the new leaves on the trees in spring, and my first thought is not of life and renewal, but of a metallic dust that settles in the lungs. The poison has not only damaged my body, it has stolen the color from me. This is the quiet, enduring tragedy of the Scheele's green affair. It wasn't just a story of sickness and death, but of a deep and lasting breach of trust. Trust in industry, trust in the safety of one's own home, and even trust in the simple beauty of the world. As you close your diary, the evening light fading in your safe, non-toxic room, you are a survivor. You have lived to tell the tale, but you are also a casualty. You carry the invisible scars of the era when beauty and poison were one and the same. And you know with a certainty that chills you to your core that you will never be quite the same. The story of Scheele's green does not end when the last roll of toxic wallpaper is torn from the walls. The poison, it turns out, is patient. It sleeps locked away in the very objects that tell the story of the Victorian era, and for those who are the custodians of that history, the danger is still very real. Let's fast forward more than a century. We leave the gaslit world of the 19th century and arrive in the quiet, climate-controlled environment of a modern museum storage facility. You are a collections manager, a curator, or a conservation scientist. Your job is to preserve the past. But sometimes, the past tries to poison you. You are standing in a vast, clean, well-lit room. Rows upon rows of tall metal shelves hold acid-free boxes of all shapes and sizes. The air is cool and dry, humming with the sound of the ventilation system. This is the behind-the-scenes world of a museum, where the 90% of the collection that isn't on display is carefully stored. Today you are accessioning a new acquisition. It's a donation from an estate collection of 19th century books. You open one of the boxes. Inside, nestled in archival tissue paper, is a set of beautifully bound volumes of poetry. And the cloth covers are a stunning, vibrant, emerald green. Your heart sinks a little. You know what this means. You put on a pair of knit-roll gloves and a disposable respirator mask. You carefully lift one of the books. It's beautiful. The green cloth is stamped with an intricate gold leaf pattern. It's a perfect example of mid-Victorian bookbinding. It's also almost certainly a toxic object. The arsenic green pigments weren't just used for wallpaper and dresses. They were used for everything. Book covers, board games, hat boxes, sample cards for fabrics, even postage stamps. The Victorians surrounded themselves with this color, and now all that stuff is ending up in museum collections. You take the book to the conservation lab, a room that looks more like a scientific research facility than an art studio. Here, you have tools the Victorians could only dream of. You use a handheld X-ray fluorescence XRF analyzer. It's a device that looks a bit like a price scanner gun. You point it at the green cover and pull the trigger. It bombards the object with X-rays, causing the elements in the pigment to fluoresce, and then it reads the energy signatures to identify them. On the small screen, the results pop up in seconds. A huge spike for Cu copper and an equally massive spike for arsenic. Confirmation. This beautiful book is shedding invisible toxic dust. Now a whole new set of procedures kicks in. The book has to be labeled with a hazard warning sticker. It has to be stored in its own sealed polyethylene bag. Anyone who handles it in the future must be wearing appropriate personal protective equipment (PPE). You can't just put it on a shelf in the library for a researcher to browse through. It has to be handled in a special room with a fume hood. This is a huge and largely unseen challenge for museums and archives all over the world. They are, in effect, becoming repositories of hazardous waste, and they are still discovering the extent of the problem. Librarians and archivists, often working with limited budgets, are now having to be trained in hazardous materials handling. There's a vibrant academic and professional discussion in the museum and conservation community about this. What is the best practice for managing these toxic heritage objects? Should they be sealed away forever? Should attempts be made to clean or decontaminate them? A process which is often can damage the object. How do you balance the duty to preserve the object with the duty to protect the health of staff and researchers? One popular initiative is the Poison Book Project, a collaborative effort by conservators and scientists to identify and catalog arsenic-laced book covers in collections around the world. They maintain a public database so that other institutions can check their own collections. It's a modern, crowdsourced solution to a 150-year-old problem. This reveals a fascinating irony. The very objects that were once symbols of domesticity and high fashion as radioactive material. A beautiful dress from the 1862 might be stored in a special, sealed container with a warning label that reads DINGERCRSC HANDLEWITHGLOVS ANDLEWITISBIOVS ANDRESANDOR. Imagine you are preparing an exhibition on Victorian fashion. You want to display a stunning green ballgown from the period. You can't just put it on a mannequin. The fabric is likely shedding arsenic dust. So you have to enclose it completely in a sealed glass case, with its own filtered air system to ensure that none of the toxic particles escape into the gallery. The beautiful dress is now a beautiful prisoner, forever sealed off from the world it was designed to dazzle. As you finish bagging and labeling the green books, you think about the journey they have taken. From a pigment factory, to a bookbinder's shop, to the hands of a Victorian reader to a dusty attic, and now finally to this climate-controlled room. They have survived for over a century, but they have carried their secret poison with them the entire time. Your job is to ensure they survive for another century, but to do so, you must first recognize and respect the danger they still pose. The ghost of Scheele's green hasn't been exorcised, it's just been carefully catalogued and put into quarantine. Standing here in this modern sterile lab, carefully bagging a toxic 150-year-old book, it's easy to feel a sense of smug superiority over the supposedly ignorant Victorians. How could they have been so foolish? How could they not see the danger they were living with? But the story of Scheele's grain isn't just a quaint, horrifying tale from the past. It's a powerful parable, and its lessons are woven into the very fabric of our modern world. Let's take a step back and look at the long shadow this crisis cast. The decades-long struggle against arsenic green was a painful, chaotic, and often tragic learning process. But from that struggle, several crucial concepts that we now take for granted were born. This was the crucible in which the modern ideas of consumer protection and public health were forged. Before this, the prevailing attitude was caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. The responsibility was entirely on you, the consumer, to determine if a product was safe. If you bought a faulty or dangerous product, that was your problem. The Scheele's green affair was one of the first mass-scale events to challenge this idea. People began to argue that manufacturers had a responsibility to ensure their products were not, in fact, poisonous. This was a radical idea at the time. It slowly but surely led to the development agencies and regulations designed to protect the public. Think of the Food and Drug Administration (FDA) in the United States or the various rating standards agencies in the UK. Their existence is a direct legacy of scandals like this one. They were created because history proved that corporations could not always be trusted to regulate themselves, especially when public health conflicted with private profit. The crisis also revolutionized the way the public and the media interacted with science. Before, science was something that happened in laboratories and universities, far removed from daily life. The fight against arsenic green brought science into the home. The home chemistry tests, the newspaper articles explaining chemical reactions, the public lectures by doctors, all of this helped to create a more scientifically literate public, one that was empowered to question and investigate the world around them. It was the birth of popular science journalism and the idea that ordinary citizens had a right to understand the science that affected their lives. This leads to a fascinating discussion among sociologists and historians of science. Was this the beginning of our modern risk society? The term describes a society that is increasingly preoccupied with identifying, managing, and mitigating future risks, many of which are created by our own technological and industrial progress. The Victorians who suddenly became terrified of their wallpaper were arguably the first generation to experience this distinctly modern form of anxiety. They were living with an invisible man-made threat that defied common sense. The Scheele's Green Saga is a textbook case study for this. It contains all the elements of a modern public health crisis. First, a new, poorly understood technology, a brilliant chemical pigment. Second, widespread and enthusiastic adoption, everyone wanted it. Third, a slow emerging chronic health effect, the wallpaper sickness, with its non-specific symptoms. Fourth, early warnings from a fucus andrus, the doctors and scientists who were initially ignored. Fifth, industry denial and pushback, the PR campaigns and bottom paid for experts. Sixth, media sensationalism and public panic, the punch cartoons and alarmist headlines. Seventh, a slow and reluctant regulatory response, the government taking decades to act. Eighth, an eventual technological solution, the development of safe, synthetic alternatives. This pattern has repeated itself over and over again, from leading gasoline to asbestos in buildings, to CFCs in aerosols, to concerns about plastics in our food chain today. Each time, we play out a similar drama of discovery, denial, and eventual regulation. The most enduring lesson, perhaps, is about the complex relationship between aesthetics and safety, beauty and risk. The Victorians chose the green because it was beautiful. Its beauty was so powerful that it blinded them to its danger for a very long time. They wanted to believe it was safe because they wanted to live in a beautiful world. This fundamental human impulse hasn't changed. We are still drawn to new, beautiful, and convenient things. The story of Scheele's green serves as a permanent, cautionary whisper from the past, reminding us to ask questions. Where does this come from? How is it made? What is the hidden cost of this beauty, this convenience? It taught us that the most appealing surfaces can hide the most dangerous secrets, and that the first duty of a citizen in a technological world is a healthy, informed skepticism. The echoes of that desperate, frantic scraping of poison from the walls can still be heard today in every debate we have about the safety of the modern world we are building. So we have the lessons, the legacy, the historical perspective. But one question still hangs in the air, a question that historians still love to chew on over dusty archives and lukewarm coffee. Just how bad was it? What was the real, quantifiable human cost to this beautiful poison? This is where the story becomes frustratingly murky, and where we must fully embrace the phrase, historical sources are incomplete, and scholars are still debating the issue. The honest answer is we don't know for sure, and we probably never will. The biggest problem is the cause of death. You're a doctor in the 1860 seconds. A child dies after a long period of stomach pains, vomiting, and wasting away. What do you write on the death certificate? You don't write chronic arsenic poisoning from wallpaper. That diagnosis didn't really exist in the official sense. You write gastric fever, consumption, marasm is a term for severe malnutrition, or infantile cholera. The symptoms of slow arsenic poisoning are masters of disguise. They mimic a dozen other, more common, diseases of the era. Because there was no specific diagnostic category, there's no central set of sticks we can go back and analyze. We can't just run a search for deaths by Scheele's green in the Victorian public records. The victims are hidden in plain sight, their true cause of death masked by the medical terminology of the time. This leads to a wide range of estimates among historians and toxicologists. Some researchers take a more conservative approach. They focus only on the documented, proven cases, like the tragic death of the flower maker Matilda Scheele, where an inquest and autopsy specifically identified arsenic as the culprit. If you only count these confirmed cases, the number of victims is in the dozens or perhaps a few hundred. These historians would argue that while the arsenic scare was a significant social phenomenon, the actual mortality rate was relatively low and perhaps exaggerated by the sensationalist press. Then there are those who take a broader, more speculative approach. They engage in a kind of historical epidemiology. They look at the overall excess deaths from ailments with arsenic-like symptoms in affluent households during the peak years of the green pigment's popularity. They argue that for every documented case, there were likely hundreds if not thousands of undiagnosed ones. These scholars might put the death toll in the thousands, or even tens of thousands, or even tens of thousands, and argue that the poison had a significant, if hidden, impact on Victorian mortality and morbidity rates, especially among children. The debate is fascinating because it's about how we write history in the absence of perfect data. Do we stick only to what we can definitively prove, which risks underestimating the scale of a tragedy? Or do we use infants' uneducated guesswork to try and paint a fuller picture, which risks overstating the case and slipping into speculation? There is no easy answer, and reputable historians can be found on both sides of this argument. The case of Napoleon is a perfect microcosm of this debate. We have the hair samples with high arsenic levels, that's a fact. We know he lived in a damp house with green wallpaper, that's a fact. We know his symptoms are consistent with arsenic poisoning, that's a fact. But can we say with 100% certainty that the wallpaper killed him? No, the evidence is circumstantial. And so, the debate rages on. One quirky source of data that researchers have used is the advertisements from the period. They track the rise and fall of ads for green wallpapers and then the emergence of ads promoting arsenic-free alternatives. This doesn't tell us how many people died, but it gives us a clear timeline of public awareness and market response. It shows us exactly when the fear reached a tipping point and manufacturers had to change their ways. Another area of uncertainty is the non-fatal impact. How many people, like the character in our story, survived but had their health permanently damaged? How many people lived with chronic fatigue, nerve damage, or liver problems for the rest of their lives, without ever knowing the cause? This, by its very nature, is almost impossible to quantify. We can read their diaries and letters and see the complaints of ill health, but drawing a direct causal link is fraught with difficulty. So when you ask how many people were affected, The most honest historical answer is a shrug under it's complicated. We are left with a spectrum of possibility, from a serious but contained industrial hazard to a widespread, silent pandemic that claimed thousands of lives. The exact number is lost to history, buried under vague diagnoses and the passage of time. But in a way, the exact number doesn't matter. What matters is the story itself. The fact that even one person, let alone thousands, was sickened or killed by a consumer product sold to them as beautiful and safe is a powerful enough indictment. The uncertainty, the inability to ever know the true scale of the damage, is part of the haunting power of the story. The victims of Scheele's Green remain, for the most part, as silent and invisible as the poison that took their lives. We've travelled from the smoky streets of London to the quiet labs of modern museums. We've seen the poison created, celebrated, feared, and finally, banished. It feels like a story that is safely in the past, a quaint Victorian horror show we can observe from a safe distance. But is it? The final, and perhaps most unsettling, question to ask is this: have we really learned our lesson? What is the Scheele's Green of our own time? Let's pull our focus all the way back to the present day. You are sitting here now, listening to this story. You are surrounded by the products of our own age. Your phone, your clothes, the paint on your walls, the food in your fridge. We live in a world of manufactured wonders, a world of convenience and beauty that would have been unimaginable to the Victorians. But we are also swimming in a chemical soup far more complex than anything they ever face. The ghost of Scheele's Green isn't about the specific element of arsenic. It's about a pattern of human behavior. It's about our love affair with novelty, our tendency to embrace new technologies before we fully understand their long-term consequences, and the constant tension between public safety and corporate profit. And that pattern is alive and well today. Think about the story of plastics. A miracle material, cheap, versatile, and durable. We embraced it enthusiastically, wrapping our food in it, making our clothes from it, building our world with it. It was our Scheele's Green, a symbol of modernity and convenience. Now, decades later, we are grappling with the consequences of microplastics in our oceans, our soil, and even our own bodies. We are only just beginning to study the long-term health effects of this ubiquitous material we so eagerly adopted. The science is still emerging, the industry is pushing back, and the public is slowly waking up to a potential problem. Sound familiar? Or consider the class of chemicals known as PFAS, the forever chemicals, used in everything from non-stick pans to waterproof jackets and firefighting foam. They are incredibly effective at what they do. But they accumulate in our bodies. Studies are now linking them to a host of health problems. We are in the middle of the PFAS scandal right now. It's the Scheele's Green story playing out in slow motion in our own kitchens and closets. The central nagging question that the Victorians faced is one we still face every day. How do we navigate a world where the risks are often invisible and the long-term effects, the companies selling the products? The government regulators, who are often years behind the science. The media, which can swing between ignoring a problem and sensationalizing it. There is a final, ongoing academic debate that is relevant here, this time in the fields of sociology and philosophy of technology. It's the debate around the precautionary principle. This is the idea that when a new technology or product has the potential to cause serious or irreversible harm to the public or the environment, the burden of proof should be on its proponents to show that it is safe rather than its proponents to show that it is harmful to show that it is harmful. If the Victorian government had adopted the precautionary principle, Scheele's Green would likely have been banned in the 1830s, not slowly phased out at the end of the century. But this principle is controversial. Opponents argue that it stifles innovation, that it's anti-progress, and that it would prevent us from developing new technologies that could have huge benefits. It's the same argument the wallpaper manufacturers made in the 1860s. So, as we end our journey, the story loops back on itself. We are the Victorians of our own age, surrounded by wonders and potential threats. We are still trying to find the right balance between progress and caution, between beauty and safety. The story of Scheele's Green is not a closed chapter of history. It's a mirror. It forces us to look at our own world and ask uncomfortable questions. What are we currently embracing with the same blind enthusiasm the Victorians had for their beautiful deadly green? What invisible dangers are we having with, simply because we haven't learned to see them yet? The ghost of that toxic pigment is a reminder that vigilance is the price of safety, and that the most important lessons of history are the ones that never truly go out of style. And so, the story comes to a close. The lights in the Victorian houses have all gone out one by one. The frantic energy of the discovery, the panic, the anger, it all settles now, like dust motes in the final ray of moonlight. The voices from the past grow quiet, fading back into the pages of their diaries and the fine print of old newspapers. The vibrant, dangerous green dissolves into the soft, gentle grey of sleep. Feel the tension leaving your shoulders now. Let the details of the story drift and blur like watercolor on a damp page. The names, the dates, the chemical compounds, they can all float away. What remains is just a feeling, a soft echo in the quiet room of your mind. A sense of a journey taken, a mystery unraveled. You can feel the steady rhythm of your own breathing, a quiet, reassuring presence in the darkness. You are safe. You are here now, far from those dusty, dangerous rooms. The air you breathe is clean and calm. Let that feeling of safety anchor you, a small, warm weight that helps you sink just a little deeper into comfort, into rest. The story is over. Your own journey into dreams is just beginning. The end of the article. Good night.